What do you get when you take Donald Trump's first Latino federal judge and the Alien Enemies Act? You get the first preliminary injunction against the Trump administration in Texas concerning his attempt to declare war or claim that there is a predatory invasion by a Venezuelan drug gang that's been in this country for years. Not so, says Judge Fernando Rodriguez. Judge Rodriguez, Southern District of Texas, has issued the first preliminary injunction, but I assure you, not the last, claiming and declaring that Donald Trump's use of the Alien Enemies Act from 1798 to deport summarily people and remove them from this country without due process is unconstitutional. And he did two things I'm sure drove the Trump administration crazy. He declared a class action of all people in the Southern District of Texas, including his Brownsville, Texas division, to be part of a class for writ of habeas corpus purposes and the purposes of his order. And Republicans now hate class actions because they want the Democrats and fair-minded people to have to file thousands of lawsuits, not just several. So that drove them crazy, I'm sure. And the second thing that will be the subject of a future Supreme Court ruling is that the judge has declared the Alien Enemies Act to be not only judicial reviewable, in other words, a judge can review it, but has found that Donald Trump has violated that act. I'm Michael Popok. We do a show called Legal AF. It's a podcast. It's Wednesdays and Saturdays at 8 p.m. Eastern Time on the Midas Touch Network, and then every place you can get your podcast from on audio platforms. If you haven't heard of us or you missed this particular show, here's a clip.
I want to pivot right now, Popok, to the Trump-appointed judge in the Southern District of Texas, Judge Fernando Rodriguez. And Judge Fernando Rodriguez addressed an issue that even the non-Trump appointed judges so far have shied away from, right? Whether it's Judge Boasberg in Washington, D.C., Obama appointee, whether it is Judge Zenas in Maryland, not a Trump appointed judge, a Democratic appointed judge. These judges have addressed the issue of returning migrants who have been disappeared from the perspective of due process, right? Even if the Alien and Enemies Act was properly invoked, these other judges, the non-Trump appointed ones, said there's still due process. So you can't just invoke the Alien Enemies Act and then say, I don't like this person's tattoos, hence they are Tren de Aragua, hence they go to disappear and never be seen again in a foreign country. They didn't address the more thorny issue of, is this a proper invocation of the Alien Enemies Act? But Popok, this judge, Judge Rodriguez, Southern District of Texas, Trump appointee, addressed that head on. He goes, there's not a war. He goes, I read the statute. There's no war. Tren de Aragua is not a nation invading us. So no, as bad as they may be, even if I assume these people were Tren de Aragua, there's ways to deal with gang members. There's laws for that. It's not the Alien Enemies Act.
Yeah, and let me take it from a slightly different angle, and we'll end up in the exact same, we'll end up in the exact same place. That language about this is not an invasion of an enemy combatant by way of a foreign country we're at war with. This is migration, is taken from the opinions written at the federal circuit appellate court, the DC appellate court, when they were over Judge Boasberg at the time. It's almost word for word, but the fact that it resonated with a Trump-appointed judge in the deepest, darkest, reddest part of Texas tells you everything you need to know. But the angle I wanted to come at it was this way. The Supreme Court has taken a lot of flack, and for good reason, about how it operated last term and even this term, and now is still trying to find its way coming off of Rule of Law Day. One of the things that I don't want to have lost in the shuffle or in the smoke is that almost all of the decisions that the Supreme Court has made so far, even those that appear to favor the Trump administration, a lot of them are on procedural grounds. Actually ruling against the Trump administration or for it on substance, especially here on the Alien Enemies Act, has not yet happened. And I think Donald Trump is in for a world of hurt and surprise because he, first of all, if you take him at his word, he doesn't read anything that comes out of the United States Supreme Court. He relies on his non-lawyer henchman, puppet master, Stephen Miller, to tell him what it says. He relies on his lawyers, right? Whatever they tell him to do or not do, that's what he does. And if that's the case, that he's going to be in for a big shock. Because what I don't think they told him is that when the Supreme Court ruled 6-3, quote unquote, in his favor against Judge Boasberg, and said, one case in DC with one judge about the return of people that were sent to the gulag of El Salvador through some sort of Administrative Procedures Act violation or constitutional violation, that won't work for us. But what will work for us is individual habeas corpus petitions, or maybe joined together in one putative class action in the location in which these people were or are before the threat of deportation and removal, which then scattered all the cases almost immediately, and led by the ACLU, who you just interviewed the executive director on, in places like Texas and Colorado, even New York. And that's how we end up in this particular judge's courtroom. But what Donald Trump missed, and I'm sure will be a surprise to him, that will be expressed in social media rantings, is that the Supreme Court didn't say that he had the right under the Alien Enemies Act to do what he did, to conjure up a phony war with Venezuela and then use it to summarily, without due process, remove and deport people to a foreign gulag. That's not what they said. What they said is that issue is left for another judge at another day in a habeas corpus petition process. And now we're seeing 3 weeks later the result of that. The first federal judge who has been who got teed up in front of, who got asked to decide constitutionally whether Donald Trump's exercise of the Alien Enemies Act as the power to summarily remove people, whether that is constitutional or not, landed in the lap of Judge Rodriguez, who Trump appointed. And here's what we read from orders. Let's read from his order. Here's what he said. He said that the Trump administration does not possess the lawful authority under the Alien Enemies Act, and based on that proclamation, to detain Venezuelan aliens, transfer them within the United States, or remove them from the country. The president cannot summarily declare that a foreign nation or government has threatened or perpetrated an invasion or predatory incursion of the United States, followed by the identification of the alien enemies subject to detention and removal. Allowing the president, Judge Rodriguez wrote, to unilaterally define the conditions when he may invoke the Alien Enemies Act and then summarily declare that those conditions exist would remove all limitations to the executive branch's authority under the Alien Enemies Act and would strip the courts of their traditional role of interpreting congressional statutes to determine whether those acts are constitutional or not. I couldn't put it any better than that. And he pointed out, just as the judges on the DC Court of Appeals pointed out, all we're watching is the migration into this country of Venezuelans, some of which are criminal, some of which are in a narco-terrorist gang who has been here. It didn't just happen, or an incursion or predatory incursion. That's like, you know, they're at the gate. The enemy's at the gate. The Huns are at the gate. This group's been here for years. They got here through either undocumented status or documented status. They all came together. They're just a gang. They don't control the government of Venezuela. And they've been here for years, including during the first Trump administration. So you want to get rid of bad guys? We already had that rule on the books. You send it through immigration court. You prove your case. You show real, not fake photos of evidence. You put on evidence in an adversarial process. They're represented. They're given an interpreter if they don't speak English. And then, you know, we have that process. And through that, justice is done. And a judge makes a ruling. And there's an appellate process. And then the person can be deported and removed from the country. Not this other thing, this showboating. I mean, Donald Trump, besides declaring himself the Pope, I don't know if you guys, I'm sure you guys have covered it on Midas, he literally put the mitre on his head. It's one thing to call yourself the king. It's another thing, while the body of Pope Francis is not yet cold, to insult the world's Catholics and other God-fearing people and make yourself the Pope. That wasn't funny. That was in poor taste while the conclave hasn't even started yet. But it's one thing to do that and go on, and show video to your masses or your fomented masses and show video of, here's video of them getting off the plane and have their head shaved and, for political purposes, which is doing, as you and I have covered, doing horribly with the public. They are not buying what Donald Trump is selling when it comes to immigration and not obeying the rule of law. So there's a lot of firsts with Donald Trump. First judge that you and I covered who issued the first injunction and it was for birthright citizenship. And 5 days after this administration started, Judge Coffiner up in Seattle. First federal judge and hear a lot of firsts on this show. First federal judge to wrap the knuckles of law firms for having settled and not brought their cases into federal court, Beryl Howell. First federal judge to rule that Donald Trump unconstitutionally invoked the Alien Enemies Act is Judge Rodriguez, a Trump-appointed judge from Texas.
Should also be noted as you look at Maryland, there's Judge Zinnes, not a Trump-appointed judge. She's handling the Abrego Garcia case. There is the expedited discovery there has resumed. There's some deadlines coming up end of next week there. The Trump regime tried to delay. We don't know what was represented to the judge behind the scenes, but they probably try to defraud the judge and claim that they were making progress to get Abrego Garcia back. I don't see why the judge would delay it for any reason other than false representations were made to the
especially judge. And you did hot takes and so did I, especially while Donald Trump on his journalist tour is busy telling Terry Moran and Time Magazine, no one's ever asked me to pick up the phone and call my counterpart in El Salvador. You're the first person. Had my lawyers asked me, there's a phone, I could do it. Well, I'm sure Judge Zinnes, Judge Rodriguez, Judge Boasberger still has a case, and the Supreme Court was listening to that.
There's the Trump-appointed judge, Judge Stephanie Gallagher, ruled that Donald Trump must facilitate the return of another 20-year-old Venezuelan man who was previously, who was also disappeared to a concentration camp in El Salvador. The Trump regime was arguing that the invocation of the Alien Enemies Act voided a deal that the government made with that 20-year-old Venezuelan not to deport him to El Salvador. And they said, yeah, the contract got breached, but it's because of the Alien Enemies Act. And the Trump appointed judge said, no, what are you talking about? Like that's just absolutely wrong.
Welcome back. Legal AF. If you didn't know why we call it that, now you do. We sit at the intersection of law and politics so that you don't have to. I do the show on Wednesdays with Karen Freeman Agnifilo, on Saturdays with my co-founder, Ben Meiselas. And then I do hot takes at the intersection of law and politics, just like that, about every hour, 15, 16 times a week on the Midas Touch Network and over on Legal AF, the YouTube channel. Have you heard? Legal AF, the YouTube channel, Legal AF MTN, in collaboration with the brothers over on the Midas Touch Network. I curate the channel. I got a dozen contributors. We would be I think, a team, dream team law firm, but we're doing our work here on Legal AF, the YouTube channel. And then we got a Substack, Legal AF, the Substack. And you can get additional things like oral arguments from the Supreme Court on audio. You can get actual documents filed in court that we post on the Legal AF Substack. So until my next report, I'm Michael Popok. Can't get your fill of Legal AF? Me neither. That's why we formed the Legal AF Substack. Every time we mention something in a hot take, whether it's a court filing or a oral argument, come over to the Substack. You'll find the court filing and the oral argument there, including a daily roundup that I do called, wait for it, Morning AF. What else? All the other contributors from Legal AF are there as well. We got some new reporting. We got interviews. We got ad-free versions of the podcast and hot takes. Where? Legal AF on Substack. Come over now to free subscribe.